was traveling for work. And then I got home and there was just stuff everywhere, all over the house. Like every surface was covered with stuff. And I just remember thinking like, God, he didn't clean up one time. And I said, it's messy in here. And you're like, yeah, I don't know what happened. And I was like, what do you mean? I clean up the house every single day. And you looked at me totally fucking clueless. And you're like, you do? And I'm like, yes. You don't notice me cleaning up all night? Like as soon as she's in bed, I'm like picking up all the toys and rearranging everything and restocking the diapers and making sure that everything was ready for the next day, right? Or for the midnight feedings. Let's get a bottle ready. So understanding how much I did, I don't think you understood that until actually just a few years ago.
You are listening to Dedicated Joe, the new dad's guide on the upending and transformational experience of becoming a father. We are dedicated. Happy Mother's Day, y'all. For Mother's Day, I sat down with my wife, Serenity, to ask what it was really like having me as a partner during pregnancy and postpartum. And it is a doozy. When I told our daughter Della about this, she said, Mommy's going to tell the whole internet all the mistakes you made as a dad? I was like, yep, that is basically the plan, and that is what happens in this episode. She opens up about her postpartum anxiety, the invisible load she carried, what I didn't see in those early months, and she just didn't hold back. The honesty, I needed to hear it, and this one's pretty personal, so buckle up. I'm usually nervous before these podcasts, but I'm extra nervous at this one because we're going to hear some really raw stuff about how I've actually shown up as a dad. Very pleased to have my wife and baby mama and co-founder Serenity Carr. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I always intended to have you on the show. We were maybe going to do it a little later after I had a bunch of dads, but then you were telling me the story about your postpartum experience, and it was pieces of it that I just really didn't remember or hadn't heard. I was like, we got to get this on the show. We got to hear my story, our story, and essentially all the things I got right and wrong that qualify me to be here today. So
absolutely.
Did you hear Tell Me the Truth? You never hold back telling me the truth anyway, so I don't have to tell you that. So let's start with your decision to be a mom, to have a baby with me. I understand that you had sort of given up on having kids by the time we got together.
I never wanted them in the first place.
Okay.
My grandmother asked me at the lunch after my high school graduation, where do you think you'll be in the next 5 years? And I said, well, I hope to have graduated. I hope to have a really good job. And she said, and a family and a marriage? And I'm like, oh no. Hell no, I'm not doing any of that stuff. That sounds really, really hard. I watched my parents work and argue and fight and get divorced. And I was like, I don't know how to be a parent. I don't think I'd be a good one. And I'm not going to do that. But then, I had my corporate career, and then I had a kind of a spiritual awakening. And then I met you, and I was like, oh, wait a second. Maybe this isn't the cards for me. Maybe it just wasn't the right time. Obviously, it just wasn't the right time for me. But now, 6.5 years in, I actually really love being a mom, and it's part of my core identity. And I feel really grateful to you for letting me have that experience on this earth. Mm-hmm. It's actually a lot more fun than I thought it would be. I thought it was just going to be a ton of work and hard times and arguing and stress. And, maybe because I'm an older mom, I don't know, but it is some of those things, but the fun and love outweigh the hard parts.
Had you already decided you were open to babies when we met, or was it something about me or our relationship?
That's a good question. I keep trying to remember when that was. I think it might have been either right when I met you or right before I met you, within a couple year span, for sure.
And what was it about me that had you feel like, yes, I can have a baby with this guy?
Well, I wasn't a yes the day we met,
Not as much as I was.
Not as much as you were.
On our first date, I talked about our babies, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
You're like, we should get married right here on the spot we were hiking at. But I guess just over the next few years, I got to know you better and trust you and really follow you in a lot of ways, right? You've been in the space of kids and working with nonprofits and doing all different kinds of kid advocacy work that I didn't know anything about. And I will never forget on our first date, you said, no child of mine is ever going to school. And here I am with a master's degree, and my parents have master's degrees and my dad has a PhD and all this stuff. And I'm like, wait a second, what? But over the next few years, as I would ask questions, you would provide your opinion and your ideas. And I decided you were right. about a lot of things. And
Using my radical ideas on school and the education that I'd done on why and how thoughtful it was also helped inform your decision for me to be a dad?
yeah, because I realized that there was a different way.
Yeah, it was a thoughtful approach.
It didn't have to follow the same path that my childhood had followed, and I decided it sounded better. And, let's do it. Actually, I also really decided to have a baby because it was the most possible human action I could take for spiritual growth. Like what, and as my time on this earth, doesn't run out, but as it just ticks by, I want to make sure that I'm squeezing all the juice out of my life that I can. And I just had a really clear perspective that being a mom would help me do that.
That's cool. So to keep everybody on the timeline, we meet, we fall in love, we're serious for a year and a half-ish, 2 years. We decide we're going to have a baby. Somehow I convince her, as you see. We weren't married yet. You said you didn't really want to be married, but I wanted to have a baby. So okay, don't need to be married. Once we decided to have the baby, we discovered the lack of good baby food and started the baby food company with the idea that we'd launch that and then have a baby was the idea, right? And the products took way longer than they should have. In the process, fertility was difficult, right? It was hard for us to get pregnant, took many, many months. And then eventually you had this epiphany that we need to be married.
That's right. Unfortunately, I'm still mad about this, but God or my angels or the universe, whatever it was, kept whispering to me like, just get married.
Why are you mad
just
about that?
Just get married. I don't know. I had been divorced before. I didn't really want to get married again. I'm mad about it because I like to think I'm more progressive than that.
You thought you could get pregnant with
Yes, of
we
course.
could have had a baby without being married. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and we didn't try very long to get pregnant. We tried 4 or 5 months and it wasn't working.
Really? Felt like an eternity
I
to
know
me.
it feels like an eternity to you, but it wasn't. It was 4 or 5 months. And I just kept hearing the whisper, get married, get married. And so I'm like, dang it, I think we need to get married. And you're like, oh, let's do it.
I'd always wanted to be married. You'd already had a wedding. You'd already been married. It wasn't a
Yeah.
thing for you. I had not, and I've always wanted to be married, and I've always been thinking about my epic wedding. So you said you want a wedding because you were okay to just go to the courthouse or whatever. You're
Yeah,
like,
I
I need
just
to be
wanted-
married, but I don't
that's
need a
right.
wedding. I was like, I want a wedding. So you're like, okay, you plan the wedding. I'll buy a dress and show up.
Yep, that's what I did.
And I planned the most epic Joe Carr wedding
You
of
did.
all time. So
Did.
could do a whole podcast on how to plan the most epic wedding.
Well, you could sing them the song.
Great wedding. I wrote, sang you the song, and we got pregnant on the honeymoon.
That's right.
So it worked. You were right.
That's right. Those little whispers, I got to listen to them more.
So we got pregnant, and then tell us about pregnancy for you.
It was really hard. I was an older mom. I got pregnant at 40 and naturally. And I was starting a business. We were running a startup. We were trying to get these products launched. We had all of these failed production runs. So I was literally trying to get products launched at the same time that I was making a baby inside my body. And the energy that I spent was just enormous. All I remember was being nauseous and exhausted most of the time. I remember on our baby moon, we went to Maui when I think I was 4 months pregnant.
Yeah, it was like our honeymoon / baby moon.
Yeah.
We had
We did a mini moon
we
right
had a
after
short
the
little mini
wedding.
moon just to recover, but it was
No, we didn't do it just to recover. We did it because we had a factory run the next week.
Oh, we couldn't go on.
We
out of
couldn't
town.
go on a honeymoon.
Okay,
We were in Indiana. So we waited to do the honeymoon and then it ended up being a baby moon. And I remember you sang to her in my belly and I felt her move for the first time. And that was really magical. And that was the end of my first trimester. And I really think from that point on, it was more magical than uncomfortable. I mean, it got uncomfortable at the very end with just the sheer weight of my body and the hot Texas summer. She was born in August, which was brutal. Yeah. But I remember just being nauseous and tired.
The song thing I had heard, maybe you probably told me, that they can hear in there and that they start to remember things and that if you create like an original song or you just pick a song and you sing it then and then you sing it to them throughout their infancy, that it will have this sedating effect on them. So I wrote that song for Della and sang it to her about 6 months into pregnancy, I guess it was about 4 months in. So sang it to her throughout the whole time, and then she to this day can, will sing it with me every night, and it's a very special.
You sang it to her when she was 5 minutes old.
Yeah, I sang it to her right after she
Sweet.
was born. That's just her song, so that was nice. What did you perceive my role as in pregnancy? What did I do for you?
Well, I don't remember what you did for me. I know that you were generous. I remember you being generous. Like when I would turn the air conditioning all the way down to 68 because I was boiling hot, You're like, it's so cold in here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it finally feels good. And you're like, I'll go get a hoodie. I'm like, that's the right answer. And when I needed to buy a king size bed because I just couldn't move right in our queen size bed, you're like, pick out whatever bed you want. And I remember, I needed all these clothes and we didn't have any money because we were running a startup that hadn't even launched yet, right? So,
credit cards, everything was on credit cards.
yeah. So I remember you being really generous, just like, what do you need? I will help you find it. I wasn't always able to articulate exactly what I needed. Sometimes I was just really uncomfortable and grouchy, and there was nothing that I could do to make me feel a little bit better. But I do remember appreciating your generosity and your care and your attention.
Thing I could have done better? Or if we were to do it again, you would want to make sure I did X?
You already do this fairly well, but just the more patience and compassion you can muster, right? I know that you're naturally an impatient person because you're fast-paced, and I'm a naturally more patient person. When asking questions and things, I don't always know the answer right away. So just being able to muster more patience and compassion, understanding, and even really, I say compassion, and I don't really mean understanding, because you can never really understand what it's like. And sometimes it's just too hard to articulate it. Like, I don't really know what I'm feeling right now. It's so like foreign, like an alien is taking over my body. And sometimes I don't even understand it. So it's hard to communicate in that space of like that kind of magical spirit space that I think pregnancy and early postpartum days really bring. It's hard to explain.
There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of decisions to make. And so my memories that we made them pretty much together, like every major decision was kind of mutually discussed and decided. Was that how you felt too?
Major decisions like
around
what?
The birth, around what to buy, around where to put the baby, around what kind of diapers we were going to use, around, things like that.
That's not my memory.
Who to hire.
My memory was that I did most of the research. I'm the researcher of the pair of us. So my memory is that I went probably overboard with reading blogs, and I listened to so many birth podcasts. I listened to so many birth stories. I read a lot of books, and then I read just a shit ton of Amazon reviews on different products and trying to figure things out. I read, everybody has a top 10 things you need on your baby registry. So I remember building the baby registry. We did a little bit of it together, but I remember me doing most of it. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my memory.
You definitely did the research around gathering the information. I guess what I'm talking about is deciding, okay, here's the options. Or like with I think it was like a Mama Natural baby list. It was like anything on this list we can buy. So buy basically everything we need of this list was sort of my instruction. And so you would sort of like give me guide rails and I'd execute some of it.
You went shopping?
Yeah, we like,
I
built the registry. I think I like actually copy pasted stuff into theirs. Maybe you did too. I don't know.
Thank you.
But like there was, but yeah, you helped figure out what the general framework was. But like around whether it was going to be home birth or the birth center or hospital, like we did all those appointments together. We did researched all that.
I remember you came to a lot of the midwife appointments, and we did talk a lot about home birth, birth center birth, hospital birth, right?
I don't remember missing one, but I guess it's possible I missed one.
Yeah, I remember there was one where you weren't there. She was like measuring me with a measuring tape.
All right.
And
then we ended up deciding on a home birth, which is what I had always wanted. You were initially kind of uncomfortable with, so why did you decide on that?
I do what I do because I don't trust doctors. So, I had really bad GERD, acid reflux. And then I had a doctor put me on a pill every day for the rest of my life. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's not that. So just in general, I find it difficult to trust the current medical system. And I found a midwife who'd been practicing for 40 years. And she said, as you're making this decision, my advice to you is to choose the place where you feel safest. And so for me, I visited the hospitals, I visited the birth clinics, obviously I visited my own home, and then I listened to a lot of different birth stories. And I decided that if relaxing and feeling safe was my number one goal during the labor process, that my house was the best place for that. And I lived really close to a hospital. So, I didn't live out in the boonies. knees or anything. So if anything happened and I needed to be transferred, like it was not a long drive.
And we were still in the process of starting the business. Product still hadn't launched. And we decided we hired this midwife to do the home birth. You had also wanted a doula for the home birth?
Yeah.
In addition to the midwife?
Yeah, I mean, they can be 2 days, 2.5 days long, right? Mm-hmm. So I knew I wanted to have somebody with me if I wanted them with me. And surely people have to sleep at some point. And then also you were going to be around, and I just wanted as much calm support as I could get.
And we remember this differently, but you were saying before that I did not want a doula also?
No, you totally didn't. Why would we pay for a doula when we've already got this midwife? And you've got me. You've got me, you kept saying. And I'm like, you've never been through a birth? Never, So, like, how would you know what's happening during a birth? I want somebody who's been there, done that, and who can coach me through the whole thing, and who I can trust if things are go normally and safe, or if a call needs to be made, and if something's not going right. Like, I need someone who can be that for me, because I knew I couldn't do that for myself.
Yeah, I perceived myself as knowing a lot more about birth than most men, both from having one of my best friends was a midwife and just told me endless stories about birth, and just I have no shyness about fluids or bodies or
True.
all that stuff. I have I'm not squeamish at all about that. So I think I perceive myself as like more engaged than most men, and that the doula seemed like because the dad didn't know what he was doing was, I think, the judgment I had.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit arrogant in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you've never been to a birth before. You thought you knew everything, and I just couldn't take that risk.
I underestimated how much of my own experience I'd be having.
That's right. And see, I couldn't articulate that to you at the time.
Yeah.
Right? I just knew I needed somebody there.
I think you need to just be a dad. You just need to have your dad experience. Like, you can help also whatever the role is, but you need to be free to be a dad, and like she needs as much support as she needs, right? And the midwife in this case was going to be sort of more like the doctor, and the doula would be sort of more like a nurse kind of thing. Della was frank breech, wouldn't turn, so midwife would not do a home birth, a breech baby. They come out feet first, which is
butt first.
They come out butt first, right? They're upside down, and it's very hard to get out, and they have to be resuscitated. And she said she did it, and she just didn't ever want to do it again because it's too scary for a midwife to be resuscitating a baby. And we looked very hard to find anybody who'd do a natural birth. You seemed game to do it if you could find.
I watched free births on YouTube,
yeah,
which is when a mom has a birth by herself. Okay,
yeah,
like these ladies are squatting in the corner of their living room.
And you hate doctors and hospitals, so C-section was just like, if I can avoid a C-section, I will avoid a C-section. But by that point, 2 weeks before due date, we tried the turning thing.
ECV.
The ECV, turner, which looked like it was pretty painful.
It was horrible. Yeah, so painful.
Pretty awful. And then accepted that we were going to have a hospital birth at that point because she didn't turn. And
we had toured the hospital. So, I had submitted my paperwork. And
we found like the most sort of natural birth-friendly hospital in Austin. And we had a birth plan written out.
I had 2 birth plans, one for a home birth and one for a hospital birth.
So we had that ready to go, and then we did the ECV, and it didn't work, so we interviewed the hospital doula, which was different than our midwife. She's like, you don't need me for a hospital.
That's right.
Overkill. So interviewed hospital doula that Saturday morning, and then went into labor Saturday night.
But in between, we interviewed the doula, had the car seat installed.
Oh, right. That day we had the car seat.
At Enlightened Baby downtown, because they do installs. And then my water broke at about 9 p.m.
Yeah. And I called the doula. I was like, hey, great meeting you today. You're hired. We're in labor.
Yeah, that's right.
And she's like, oh, okay, let's go. She said, go back to bed, rest, and call me when contractions are certain distance apart.
That's
I remember.
Right.
And it was probably like 3 a.m. that we were like, okay, now's the time. Let's go to the hospital. We showed up to the hospital. No care, no doctor standard. We hadn't set up any kind of care.
We're their worst nightmare.
Just ER at 3 a.m. in labor with a doula and a birth plan, 2-page birth plan, saying like, this is the birth we want. It's, very
I'm
crunchy.
on all fours in the hallway because I rejected the wheelchair, which was a dumb decision, and I couldn't keep walking. So you left me, and
go back and get the wheelchair.
Yeah,
I took pictures and video of all that.
The security guard was like, how you doing? Yeah. And I'm like,
Because you were there by yourself.
Yeah.
I had to go get the wheelchair, so they're like, what is this pregnant woman doing on the floor?
Poor guy.
We'll cut in some videos and pictures of this because it's you would have been horrified if you noticed, but it's fun to watch now. And so we have this birth in the hospital. What did you perceive my role there as?
I really perceived your role as my advocate, and I think you did a really nice job. One of the parts of the birth plan for a C-section was that I wanted skin-to-skin contact ASAP. And I said, if they take her away from me in the room, you go with her, right? Like, I will be fine. I'm a grown-up. I can handle myself. I'm stuck on a table anyway. But if something's happening with her and she needs support, go with her, and just, you are her dad now, and she needs you. Or I'm lucky that didn't happen, right? She was
touch
fine.
her. I don't know if you told me to touch her, but
I did.
Touched my skin to her the whole time.
You did, and it was skin to skin in like 4 minutes. Yeah. They did a nice job.
Yeah, 3.5 minutes, which they thought was good. I thought that was crap.
That's right. 3.5 minutes.
I thought it was like instant. Was in my mind. You pull it out and give it to you. But
no, they had to put the little cuff on her leg and stamp her foot and put a hat on it, put a diaper on. Like, I appreciate the diaper. So. That was nice, but.
And got her to you, and then saying so advocate. We had the doula, so she was holding space for you.
Yeah, I mean, you did a really nice job of implementing my birth plan also, right? Like, I said that if I had a hospital birth, I wanted the least amount of talking, amongst the surgeons, the surgical team, all the nurses. I wanted lights to be turned low. I wanted calm music. And I was actually kind of pissed when you pulled that speaker out of the bag, but I couldn't tell you because I was having a contraction. And then the music started and I was like, this is so nice. So when we get to the hospital, you also had forgotten the bag and you had to go move the car. And
there was more stuff that I could carry in one trip.
That's right.
And the bag that had all the key things, of course, was the bag.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but I really respect the hospital and those nurses because they said, oh, you've written a birth plan. We're not going to do anything until your birth plan gets here. And I was kind of mad. It seemed to take forever. They had me strapped up to a heart monitor for 2 hours before they could decide that the baby and I were okay. And they asked me all these horrible health questions.
Pro tip, have the birth plan, lots of copies, one in your pocket, one in every bag. Yeah. Doula has one. Mom, have that birth plan freaking everywhere. You gotta make sure everyone has those. So usually they ask all those questions in advance if you do the intake, but we had never done it. So we actually had done it. They hadn't even filed the paperwork.
That's right.
We had already answered it all, but it was like 3 days ago.
So I'm standing on a scale and having contractions because they need to weigh me for the medicines that they're gonna do it, putting the epidural and all that stuff. That was horrible. The worst part by far of my birth was the car ride to the hospital and then the intake. But then once all that was done and they said, you aren't really an emergency birth. Everything's fine. Everyone's fine. It's just that she's, frank breech. So we're just going to wait till the morning surgical crew comes so that you've got a nice fresh crew. And so you've got, just go ahead and just labor here for a while. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. How much longer? And then I have actually no memory of the time between when you turned on that soft music and then they came back in a couple hours later saying, okay, it's time to go to the emergency or the operating room now. Like, that was just trance, like labor, lovey-dovey mama juju. I don't remember anything from that.
The doula was like a shaman in that moment.
She was great. She had this fan. Yeah, she was awesome.
A few times you noticed I was gone. And you're like, where did he go?
Well, you kept leaving. Yeah. I'm like, where is he going? Good thing this doula is here. Joe keeps leaving. And you're like, yeah, my tummy's acting up. I have to keep going to the bathroom. I'm like, good thing I hired her.
Yeah, I poop when when I'm nervous. And that was like four different rounds of like everything in me coming out. I was so nervous. That was a lot of energy. Had a battle with the anesthesiologist around the doula and the photographer being in the room. He wouldn't let anybody but me in the room, this was pre-COVID, like there's really no reason for it, but pretty angry at that guy. I in hindsight, I would have asked to speak to a supervisor. I would have stayed more calm. I would have insisted. I would have just brought them with me and forced them in the room. Like, there's a lot of things I could have done. So just for my own learning of rather than accepting that he was God and could make that decision for us, I guess, as advocate in birth, I was prepared to be warrior mode I, like you said, I did a lot of that, and I made sure they weren't chatting during the surgery and things like that. I feel like I failed in that to like overcome that obstacle in him and have a lot of resentment at him, mostly because it's at myself, I think. So, but it was fine. It was fine. I took pictures and you were fine and baby was fine. It turned out all right. So, So that's good. So we have the baby.
Yep.
And then now we're postpartum. So how was your postpartum experience?
It was terrible. I mean, in the hospital, I wasn't sleeping at night, and I get home and I'm kind of feeling a little crazy, right? Because I haven't slept in like 4 days. And I talked to my midwife. She came over to check the baby, because I only went to the hospital that one time. Like none of my like postpartum care or pregnancy care was done at the hospital. It was still all the same amazing midwife. And she looked at me and she's like, you don't look okay. And I got scared because I was like, oh God, she's been doing this 40 years. And now she says this to me, like I trust her. And I said, I'm not sleeping. I don't know what's happening, but I just can't sleep. And she helped me realize that I had sleep apnea, like at postpartum. And so I'll never forget, she built me this throne out of like 50 pillows. And she said, do you have anyone who can go to the east side of Austin? And I was like, well, yeah, my sister and mom are having lunch over there right now. And she said, go to this address down the alley, knock on the side door, and they will give you some human milk. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? And so my mom and sister literally showed up to this house with no furniture. There is a person who hands them 3 bags of frozen breast milk and like waves goodbye.
It's like a little back alley drug deal. It
was very weird. But then my mom took night duty, feeding duty for the next night or two, which probably dipped my milk supply, in hindsight, but also at least I got some sleep and I didn't feel like a total psychopath.
It's crazy how hospitals don't value sleep. Like they interrupt sleep constantly.
Oh, I yelled at them so much for that.
One of the things we discovered was that we could just tell them, don't
come in here.
Sleep. Batch all of, whatever tests you need to do.
That's right.
Do them all at once.
Send all 3 nurses in to check the baby, check the mama, check all the things, send them all at the same time.
Once we realized they were like sort of doing it every hour and a half, they were interrupting us, was like, just batch all this and try to do it in the morning, like try to let us sleep. Mm-hmm. So but we got out of the hospital pretty quick, a lot faster than most.
Oh, yeah.
We skedaddled out of there. But then, you had a lot of issues with sleep. Mm-hmm. And then my role in postpartum, what did you perceive it to be?
Well, you were a caretaker. I had a bunch of stitches everywhere, right? I wasn't allowed to lift anything heavy. You did all of that. You took care of Della as much as you could, right? Doing diaper changes and just holding her and rocking her and putting her to sleep and helping me out, bringing me food, setting things up. I mean, really, you did my bidding very well. You were gracious. You didn't get grumpy about it very often, and I was grumpy too. I mean, we did have a postpartum doula. Charlotte was great. I'll never forget. She handed me a plate of perfectly cooked scrambled eggs. And I remember thinking like, this is luxury. She made them just right. They were hot. She was giving me massages and the baby massages and just really, like she even said, I still have this picture. I was holding her at one point, just feeling exhausted, right? Like 7 days in or something. And she said, you just look so beautiful right now with your baby. Can I take a picture of you? And I just felt like a queen. She was amazing. So, and I know that you did actually a lot of that coordinating with her schedule wise and showing her where everything was in the house, right? Really helping to figure all of that out.
She gave me a massage too.
She did?
Yeah.
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah. Way to go.
Yeah, postpartum doula is super game changer for sure. Mm-hmm. And then we had a lot of people come and help.
That's right. And you organized all of them. That was amazing. The meal train and all the whatever the things were.
That went okay for you? You felt like they were there to serve you?
I don't remember that. So I'm sure it went okay because if it went bad, I probably remember.
The first 40 days book spells this out on how you create community support based around serving mom rather than seeing baby.
That's
right. They want to come see the baby. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, maybe you get to see the baby, but if you're going to come, you need to serve mom.
Yeah,
like,
do some laundry, wash some dishes.
Yeah, so I had a spreadsheet of all the.
It worked great.
All the stuff for people to do, and so that's good. It was a lot of hustle and bustle outside of the bubble with you and Della.
Yep.
But you perceived that as good. We'll also say that our products launched the same day we went into labor as well. So all the other list of stuff that happened that day, also the products launched.
I remember I was in labor and I saw you over there like on your phone and I was like, what's he doing on his phone? Or, I was mad about it. And I looked at the clock and it took me, I don't know how long to realize that it was Sunday morning and the products were getting ready to launch in about an hour or two. And I'm like, dang, all right, you do that one. I'll do this one. Good thing I've got this doula here to support me. And the products launched the day she was born.
Baby wasn't supposed to come for 2 or more weeks. So it was like, okay, we're going to launch and we'll kind of have everything done and then we'll be able to have the baby. And then, of course, baby came 2 weeks early. Products had been trying to launch for 2 years, so we weren't going to slow it down. But it happened to be on the same day. So we had twins. When I was running the company, I did we had
2 weeks.
A team. It was a 2 weeks that I took where I really didn't do much with the launch.
Right.
Like I maybe had a call a day or something to check in on stuff. But we had a good team in place which was great in hindsight to have so early handed stuff off to a team. I think a lot of founders try to run it themselves for too long, so we were forced to do that. And so helping out in that kind of early postpartum. Anything else about like sort of the longer term postpartum, like 3-4 months in?
Well, I remember you went on a work trip at about 6 weeks because it was the big trade show. And I remember thinking, there's no way I can do this by myself. And then literally as your plane wheels were like taking off, Della and I got a stomach bug. And at one point, not too far after that, we were both laying on the floor of the bathroom. We were both crying. And I was like, this is a disaster. He has to come back. I can't do this without him. So you were really supportive because your absence was felt very strongly. And I mean, I knew it was a good trip for our business, and actually that is the trip where you met the buyer that ended up getting us into Whole Foods later.
It's true.
So it was a very important trip for us and for our business, but that was really hard. And then I had postpartum anxiety, which I didn't know I had. I knew that I was dealing with sleep apnea and sleep problems, but I didn't realize that I also had anxiety on top of it. So what it looked like was I was so exhausted, but I would lay down to sleep and could not fall asleep. My mind would race. I would think of all the things that are happening with her, like she's got some baby acne, or her poop was green, or like she's been spitting up more than normal, or what is this cry about, this new cry? You know, I just would drive myself crazy thinking of all these things and trying to figure out what all the root causes were. And I'll never forget one of the nights that I was awake at 4 a.m, I Googled like postpartum anxiety, wondering if there was such a thing. Because I'd heard of postpartum depression before, where like you don't want to get out of bed and you're just, I don't know, depressed. But I had never heard of postpartum anxiety before. And I read the list of symptoms and my aha moment happened. And I was so excited, like waited for you to wake up. Because at that point, I think we were sleeping in separate bedrooms some nights, right? So that one of us could get a good night's sleep. I mean, I was still nursing. So I think you were sleeping in the other bedroom a lot of the time. I couldn't wait for you to wake up because I was like, oh, I know what's wrong with me. It's postpartum anxiety. And I decided in that moment that if I needed to take medication for it, that I was going to be okay with doing that, even though I'm very crunchy and don't like medication, but I was not myself. And you said, all right, what do we do? And I said, well, I've got this big anti-anxiety toolkit that I've built over the last however many decades. I've had anxiety my whole life, just not ever that bad. So you're like, all right, I will do whatever it takes. What do you need from me? And so I remember you being also very generous in terms of I literally need you to make my food, put my food on a plate and bring it to me. You know, it felt too hard to ask for something as simple as like making my food and putting it in my lap and bringing me a napkin now. And can I have some ice in my water? And I don't want this fork, you know, or I need a spoon, right? Like asking for all those things just felt really hard. And you were very willing to meet whatever those needs were, even when they sounded completely crazy. And I also remember you doing all of the poop diaper changes. Like we had agreed to that
Minister
beforehand.
of Poop was my title.
You were Minister of Poop, and you literally did it. If you were home and there was a poopy diaper, you were the one who changed it. And I wasn't sure you were going to keep your word in that way, right? We'd never done this before, but I was pleasantly a little bit surprised that you're like, yep, every single time I brought you, no matter if you were working or doing something, you were in the middle of something, you're like, nope, I'll stop and I'll do the poopy diaper. So that really worked well.
I liked knowing very specifically what my role was. There's so much of it is innately between you and her, breastfeeding and the skin to skin and the soothing and you're like the same person. That fourth trimester they call it is yours. She's still basically
she doesn't know that we're separate people.
Yeah, and so like, but as my baby, I want it's out of you now. I want to help and I want to be a part of it. And so knowing concretely what to do is part of reasoning starting this podcast is what being dedicated is all about. Is like I'm fully there from the first moment and everything I can do. So glad that you felt that. You'd had anxiety before, so it wasn't too new. I had no idea what a postpartum recovery birth experience is like, so I wasn't sure if what you were going through was normal or not. But yeah, it was a shit show. You were very unhappy.
It was horrible.
Like, yeah, you did. Like from that first day, the midwife said, like, you look pretty awful. Like, it was sort of like that for months. And we're trying to run the business, and there was some pieces of some decisions to make that I needed your input on, or, there were some things that I tried to get from you that were pretty tough.
I mean, I just remember you being gone, right? You were like, not necessarily physically because we didn't have an office yet, but you were working for hours and hours and hours and hours every day because running a startup is really, really hard. And I just remember feeling so alone and so abandoned and just like, clueless out here floating around on my own, adrift without a lot of direction and support. I had loving people in my family, but I also know that that's the moment where my brain as a mom is rewiring itself into my new identity as a mother, right? And so it was just really uncomfortable and painful. And I only have one kid for a reason.
Your sister lives in town, but we don't have any other family in town.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of friends and community. A lot of people came in that first kind of several weeks, but it sort of dies down after a couple of months, maybe the first month and a half.
Yeah.
And then, but this persisted. We're talking still into 3-4 months here when you were not doing very well.
I didn't realize I had postpartum anxiety till 3 or 4 months in.
Right. And and I was more than full time working back at that point and trying to figure that out. I do remember we were talking recently about the moment of the house becoming a disaster. Me just saying, like, I don't understand.
Oh yeah.
Why the house is such a mess.
Well, this was
all this work come from?
This was after Della was about 1 year old, so she had weaned by this point, and I was traveling for work. And then I got home, and there was just stuff everywhere, all over the house. Like every surface was covered with stuff. And I just remember thinking, like, God, he didn't clean up one time. And I said, it's messy in here. And you're like, yeah, I don't know what happened. And I was like, what do you mean? I clean up the house every single day. And you looked at me totally fucking clueless. And you're like, you do? And I'm like, yes. You don't notice me cleaning up all night? Like as soon as she's in bed, I'm like picking up all the toys and rearranging everything and restocking the diapers and making sure that everything was ready for the next day, right? Or for the midnight feedings. Let's get a bottle ready. So understanding how much I did, I don't think you understood that until actually just a few years ago.
And you were back fully working at that point. I mean, by a year, you were full time again with us. So we were working the same amount.
In the business.
Yeah, in the business. I perceived myself as playing equal role in the household. And then you left, and there's all the stuff that I didn't know you were doing. So this is invisible labor, I think.
That's right.
Like what they call it for women, the mental load and the invisible labor.
Mm-hmm.
And so so I perceive myself then as helping. I mean, obviously you were gone, so you weren't doing your piece of it, but it seems like your perception was that I was not equal either.
Oh, yeah.
I was not doing.
Not even close. I remember almost every night you were like after bedtime, you were watching TV, and I didn't like roll into bed till 11 p.m. because I was doing all the household things, paying the bills, buying the new clothes and next size up, figuring out all the groceries to buy, like whatever the things were. I just remember envying you and the fact that you were able to have all this free time to watch hours of TV a night. And I never, ever, ever watched TV. I never read a book. I had no fun, basically, except when I was playing with my kid, and no breaks. And I was really resentful about that.
Did you try to talk to me about that?
Yeah, I did. I'm sure I did. I'm sure I bitched about it. That's for sure. I'm sure I complained about it. I remember, but I'm not sure I was very clear in my communication. I remember complaining that you were watching so much TV, which wasn't the actual thing. Mm-hmm. The actual thing was that I'm drowning over here and I need help, right? But I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to talk about all of the hundreds of different things that I did on my checklist every day. I mean, I didn't even have a checklist. It was all just in my mind, right? So I had no vocabulary to be able to describe what I was experiencing and to even figure out how to ask you to help with all these hundreds of different things that I wasn't even sure you could do or were willing.
I wanted to. I was committed to. Did you believe that I was committed to doing the half, that I didn't want you to
No,
drown?
Not at all. I didn't think you were committed. You seemed committed to watching your TV at night. While you were doing that, I was working on the household and figuring everything out, and you didn't offer to take any of it.
Yeah, I didn't notice.
You didn't notice. You had no idea that I cleaned the house every night, for example. Like you had no idea what I did all day.
I myself as doing it. So whether I said I was willing or not, you didn't believe it because you were doing work and I wasn't, and I didn't know you were.
I thought it was terribly unfair.
Yeah, and so I don't think that really that resentment sounds like it persisted really until we discovered fair play.
That's right.
How old was Della when you?
3.
It was 3. How'd you find the fair play model?
I had to have been on social media. That's the only place I can imagine that I saw it. And I saw that there was a documentary about it. And so I had watched the Fair Play documentary from Eve Rodsky, and I thought she was just brilliant. I mean, the documentary itself kind of lays out the problem, which I had never put the pieces together like that. Like, if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's amazing. But I remember wanting you to watch it with me and trying to convince you to watch a documentary with me as opposed to, like, you know, a fun action movie or something. You're like, oh, I don't really want to watch this. I don't want to spend my time doing that. Like, you wanted to watch a movie with me that you would actually enjoy, which I get because we never watch movies.
We had such little movie time.
Yeah, we didn't have much time together, right? So I understand that. And then I remember I felt like I had to kind of get loud about it and say, you know, you are an activist and you care all about these oppressed people around the world. And you have an oppressed person living in your house and you can't even see it. And I remember, I feel like that was maybe when the window cracked open for you. Like, oh, now I'm curious. You know, now I might be willing to consider seeing something that I haven't seen before. And we did watch the documentary, and you were more open to the ideas. You were still grabbing on to the fact that you're pretty sure you still did half of the work, but you were open to considering something different.
Yeah, I don't think I heard that you wanted me to watch it for your emotional or state or well-being, like as something to invest in our relationship. I think it was more of like, look at this cool documentary I want you to see with me, you know, like as if it was on
I was trying to play it up.
The World War II, you know, whatever, some kind of historical thing. You like slow, boring movies that like I never like. So I think I thought it was like just like for fun or for like, this is just interesting. And I was like, it's not that interesting to me. So I think it was when you really said like, no, like I'm suffering, I'm having trouble. This is a piece of this is a step towards equality that I know you value, you know, that let's watch it. So I was like, oh, if that's in that case, you know, play the feminist card, like I'm all about it.
But then that lays out the problem, and I didn't know what the solution was.
It was very hard to watch that movie. It's very hard to watch because, you know, it obviously there's an incredible amount of inequity in this country for women overall, from the wage gap on up. And a huge piece of it is, of course, proportionate household work. And I saw my mom suffer enormously with that. My dad worked full-time at the house. She was a stay-at-home mom. And it was perceived that her full-time job was the house and he worked outside and that was it. And it's more than a full-time job. It doesn't work that way. So I had committed to being much more engaged than my dad was with housework and child raising and all that stuff. And I was at this point. So watching the film was tough because it was hard to identify with the men in it. Like the level of unawareness that those men had was not me. It sounds like we weren't truly equal either. And so I think it was the film's more designed for women to like you identify the problem and understand, oh, I'm not alone here.
And put some words language to it. Right?
And maybe if there's men who are a little more in that direction could benefit from seeing it. But I was ready for the solution. Like I believed you that it was inequitable. I knew but the film doesn't spell out the solution at all. So that was what I was just like, I don't want to talk about this problem anymore. It's that guy's not me. But if there's a system you want to implement here, I'm down. And then we got the book. That's
right. I read the book and I highlighted, you're not a big reader, so I highlighted some certain sections and a couple pages for you to read. And then I got the card deck, which has 100 different household activities. And we started kind of rearranging the cards and seeing who owned what. Yeah. And the part that it took a bit for, I think, you to understand was the mental load part. Like if someone is holding the card for weekday dinners, then everything about the weekday dinners, that person who is holding that specific card is responsible for. And I feel like you did a lot of work, but I had to do the mental load to tell you to do it, when to do it, how to do it, with what, bank account to do it or whatever. Like I was still holding a lot of the mental load and doing a lot of the mental planning part. And my favorite part about Fair Play is the fact that it's conception, planning, and execution. So all of the ideas around it, making all the plans, and then executing the plan is all that same person's. Once we started Fair Play, I also will never forget that, I don't know, maybe 4 months in or something, you looked at me with wild eyes at like 10 p.m. And I'm like, are you ready for bed? And you're like, I still just have so much to do. I can't go to bed right now. I've got to make the lunches and I've got to do the laundry and I've got to do all these things. And I remember thinking like, oh, he finally gets it. He finally is doing enough of the conception, planning, and execution to where he realizes how much there is and how his nights are now no longer 2 hours of TV or a movie every night. He's actually participating and actually caring a lot more than he ever has. And I remember you looking at me and saying, like, I can't keep up this pace. And I remember thinking, screw you. I've been doing this for 3 years, you know? I didn't have a lot of compassion, honestly. And that's, you know, something that I could go back and have. But I said, like, I can't do it either. I've been doing it for 3 years at this pace, and you're only doing half, and I was doing way more than half, right? So if you can't do it and I can't do it, we need another solution. We need to do something else, like do less. Or I remember the best Mother's Day gift I ever got was that laundry service you bought me. They come, they take your dirty clothes, and they bring them back all folded. And I'm like,
Fucking $30 or $30.
This is the best thing I've ever gotten.
All the laundry we can fit into those bags. And they come back and it comes back folded like a day later, 2 days later, like for $30.
So amazing.
It's like so easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finding simplified solutions like
That's
that.
right.
I mean, so we did the deck. We got a spreadsheet that outlined the deck. It took about 6 hours is my guess.
It took multiple times. It was painful.
Three sessions of 3 2-hour sessions probably.
It was kind of painful to
figure out who's doing what card and what the minimum standard of care is. I think a huge piece of it, of the power of fair play, is the minimum standard of care, because there was a lot of chores that I believed I was holding, but you didn't think I was holding. So you worried about it or thought about it or had to correct it. That was like mental load you had on a card. So even though I was doing the work, like you still had to think about it. And so like establishing minimum standard of care.
Like one of my favorite examples, that's an easy example, is the trash. So I had to take the trash out as a kid, and I don't like taking out the trash. Joe doesn't mind it, but I don't like it when it's stinky. So the minimum standard of care in our house is, I say, instead of nagging him to take the trash out, I say, I noticed that the trash can is stinky. And our agreement is that within like around a 2-hour period, he will just take the trash out. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure you've ever forgotten.
Except for today.
You forgot today?
I just realized I didn't take the trash out before we left. I'll take it off before you wake up tomorrow.
You know, but you've done a really good job.
And in the past, you'd say it's stinky, and I'd be like, okay.
Yeah, you didn't care.
Or you'd be like, take the trash out. I'd be like, I'm going to take it out when it's full. Like to me, the minimum standard of care was when it's full, it goes out. Or on Mondays when it needs to go to the, like that was the minimum standard of care to me. So this was like a great example of like, you had a thought that it should be taken out when it's stinky, and I didn't think that. And so we just had this tension around a chore all the time because it got stinky, you know, once a week sometimes. And so we decided, you thought I should take it out right that second, and that wasn't fair to me. So I was like, 2 hours was the negotiation. I always seem to get to it. And so like, I don't perceive myself as taking on that much extra labor from fair play. I think you have a different version of it, which is fine. I definitely see that your mental load went way down.
That's right.
That whether or not I took up, maybe I have a higher capacity for labor or whatever, but like you stopped worrying about the chores I was doing. You were doing work on top of my work.
That's right.
That was exhausting you unnecessarily. And it didn't actually take more time for me. There were moments like you described where tasks started to grow and grow and grow as she got older, as things changed with school or work got busier and I had less time here or whatever. And we've had to continue to find solutions for that, paid help and simplifying, lunch packing, things like that. But the liberating your mind, and then the creation of unicorn space, that creates time was really the weirdest thing about fair play, which just has to be duplication. The only explanation for the creation of time fair play does is that we're duplicating. You're thinking about something, I'm thinking about something, we both are doing something. And now, because it's all organized, there's free space for both of us to have special time for me to make costumes. That's like one of the biggest things.
And I've been reading for the last 3 years now. Yeah. I'm a big reader. I go to yoga classes, have time to do my self-care, my like long showers where I like do all the scrubs and things. And
I still get to watch some TV or go to the gym and things like that. And then the costumes or the creative projects, writing songs, things like that.
And I want to say that we don't do fair play exactly how the book lays out, because I just get so confused when we trade the cards all the time. Like who's holding this card and how do we actually do that? We've tried a few different things, but for the most part, we have our cards and we just kind of keep them like that. I know that sometimes it can promote taking advantage of the other one if you don't ever do that role. But I really feel like this way works really well for us.
Yeah, everybody figure it out for themselves. I'm going to have a whole solo episode coming out on fair play. You can learn more about this, but you can hear how it worked for us here. How about our relationship? How have you perceived me investing in our relationship post-baby?
Well, you've done a really nice job of helping to make sure that we have our date night, whether or not, like when she was really little and I was nursing, whether it was just having some time, at 2:00 on a Tuesday to just spend some time together, not talking about the baby, not talking about parenting, not talking about work, right? Just talking about like our current experiences, how things are going for us, how our life is going, what kinds of dreams we have, right? What are some things we'd like to put into the atmosphere that we want to manifest, right? So I really feel like you helped make sure that those happened. You hold the child care card in fair play, so you hire the babysitters. You help figure out, I think we trade back and forth on what we do on the date.
Planning the date is
like
alternate
every
monthly.
other month.
Yeah.
But, we also kind of just throw things in. If I see a play that looks fun, like today, I don't actually know whose month it is to do the dates. We're not so good about that, but we could be better. But yeah, I feel like you've done a nice job of that. And then it didn't happen right away after she was born, but I feel like you did a nice job of making the time that we spend together in our relationship really count, right? And not necessarily like pull on my energy for nurturing or care, things that you need, but really find a way to be equal partners and to just use that time wisely.
Anything I could have done or do better with that?
That's a good question. As far as the relationship goes in general, a personality thing is just compassion and patience again, right? Just if I'm grumpy, it's not always because of you, or, lots of the times I'm just grumpy because it's me. I can't always articulate the reasons behind why I want something. Sometimes it's totally irrational. Sometimes it's just an emotional or it's just a spirit thing. And not being able to specifically explain all the things I know sometimes frustrates you because you want to understand, right?
Especially if it's in the way of something I want.
I know, right?
You want something different and you can't even tell me why.
Yeah.
It's very irritating.
I can see how that would be irritating. Yeah. I'm sure it is. But that's one thing that you can maybe consider working on.
Yeah. I think I definitely have a hard time when you're in a bad place, especially at extended, when you go through those 3-4 days of grumpiness or anger, criticism. Like, it's hard for me to find a place of fullness enough in other places of my life to help get you out of it or help continue to love on you or serve you, not take it personally. Like I can take care of myself for a while. I'm not pull on you for it. I can handle it, which is better than some men maybe. But I don't make it worse, maybe, hopefully. But the next level of no, I go back and fill up enough that I can help draw you back out, which I can do. I am capable of doing. So it's not I don't know how to turn you back on. And that's what's sort of disappointing is I do know how to do it. I just can't always find the energy to do it.
Same.
So I just cope.
Yeah,
just
vice
cope until
versa
you're
too.
back. Yeah, just sort of hunker down until you're returned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a far cry from where we used to be.
Yeah.
Remember, one of us was grumpy and upset. The other one would get grumpy and upset. And we'd just take it on each other, and it was a disaster. Echo chamber, right? Back and forth.
We drag each other down so low, it takes longer to come back.
So we have come a long way.
Yeah. A lot of that's been our relationship coach. How has the coaching been for you?
It changed my life. I have a daughter. Probably because of that coach, right? He's been our coach for 8 years, 9 years. And
we were paying for coaching when we had no money. It was this is important. Did you always agree with coaching? Was that?
No, I thought it was the stupidest idea I ever heard. And you said,
no, we got to do it.
You said, let's meet with this coach. And I'm like, oh, God, I don't have time for this. And then we met with him and he's like, here's my coaching package. And I'm like, I'm sold. Let's do it. And you're like, I don't know.
We had one before that was lower cost and it was somewhat valuable, but not as great as we needed. And then we met with him as the big guns, and you were sold a lot faster than I was because the price tag was so high.
Yeah, I didn't know where we were going to get the money from, but
but we did, and we found it ever since because it's so it's invaluable. Not that we fight about different things.
Yeah, and I really feel like he does such a nice job of giving both of us total approval when we seem diametrically opposed, right? He approves of my feelings and your feelings and my position and your position. And often he just serves as translator.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for a coach, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who can talk to both of you. You always feel like they understand you and they know how to speak to you, translate the others. And if you both leaving feeling like they were on your side, that's a good side. A lot of coaches are relationship therapists get accused of like side taking. And so that's where it's like, I think that's right if you both feel like you won. You both feel like he agreed with you.
Definitely.
Or she. Yeah, so he's been really key. Feedback on me as a dad or postpartum or partner. I mean, here's your chance to lay it out. Anything else you would want differently in the past or present? Big mistakes?
I think it just really boils down to something that I think you've been working on for decades and may take more decades, is just your level of patience, right? I know that you like to move fast, and sometimes when you're talking to me or talking to Della and either there's a disagreement or someone's having feelings about things, sometimes I feel like you go a little bit too fast. You might I know that you're working to slow down and be more present, but I kind of feel like you're always sort of looking one little step forward beyond where the present really is. Not always, but sometimes when big feelings happen or big arguments happen, you're just like wanting to get it over with, right? Wanting to get to the solution. And really the messy middle part is where the most opportunity for connection and love really is. I know that you don't want to skip over that, right? Because I know you as a person, but I know that sometimes it's uncomfortable and hard to do. So I just invite you, whenever we can, to do that for each other. You
keep saying patience. I don't think it's the right word for me, because patience implies you're still waiting for something else.
Maybe it's pace.
Or presence. It's like what you're talking about is I'm future oriented. Like I perceive myself as a doer. I'm here for action. What is the thing I can do? And you can't really do relationship. There are actions you can do. And there's a long list of them, like you mentioned, organizing dates and creating time and doing childcare and doing the chores so that they're ready. But then you have to show up and be in it. And that's where I think a lot of people in this culture struggle. And it's a kind of classic man-woman dynamic thing around women wanting him to just be there. And he's like, what can I do? And so it's a lot very, just being present in the moment, which also involves feeling feelings. I think you can't do a feeling either. I can't fix your feelings, which is very maddening for me and a lot of men. We can't just act our way out of your way out of it. Just being with you with your feelings. It's easier. I've really learned to be with Della's feelings is probably really good training.
Man, Big Little Feelings changed my life. That toddler parenting class, I think it's for 1 to 6 year olds or parents of 1 to 6 year olds. And just learning how to hold space for big feelings. That is, if I had known that I had that, I could have had a baby sooner in my life, because they demonstrate a different way. Yeah. They demonstrate
formula for how to be with feelings. That's basically. Right. That's the doing. Here's what you do.
It's exactly what it looks
like. With a feeling. Yeah.
This is what you can say. This is what you do with your body.
Exact language and Big Little Feelings. Really amazing.
It's the best $100 we ever spent.
Yes. Great stuff. And then that's been a good template for like dealing with your feelings, dealing with my own feelings around my own inner child, as it were. Like that presence, I think, is the simplest and hardest thing.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I'll keep working on that.
Me too.
Any other advice you have for moms and how they can get the best support from their husbands?
Yes. And first of all, I heard this on a podcast before I was pregnant, and it was really good advice that we did. And it is, let your partner do things differently than you do it, right? Like, yes, of course, your way and my way is the best way, right? As the mom, I know my kid the best. And your kid needs to learn to be adaptable and flexible. And they have the right to bond with another parent, a family friend, an aunt, a grandparent, right? All of these, there's different sources of love in their life. And so someone had suggested to always make sure that their partner knows how to put the baby to sleep. And we made sure of that early on. And you were always really good at putting her to sleep, especially once she weaned. So we would actually take turns after she weaned. Every other night, one of us was on baby duty. And it was not always me by any means. He took every other night without fail. And I really feel like my sanity was somewhat saved by doing that. It was instrumental in my recovery process and my ability to just be a normal functioning human, to get a really great night of sleep at least every other night. And then the other thing I would say is it is really, really hard to ask for help, especially when you don't know what kind of help you actually need or want. But my advice is to just try to muster the courage to do it. To say it a different way, try to spend the time to love yourself enough to figure out what you need for help and then find the courage to ask for it. You'd be surprised how often you will get it. than you do.
I'm surprised how many people sleep together and both are woken up
All night long, every night.
Every night. And like, that we figured out early on to take turns so that only one of us was woken up. Even when you were breastfeeding, I would wake up and bring her to you on my night. And even I was back to work and you weren't. I still took every other night because your sleep was so important for you and the household and your recovery. And then when we're both working, obviously, it's the most fair time. And we still basically kind of alternate nights in various fashions. It's not as every other as it used to be because she doesn't need as much at this point. But for me, as long as she woke up in the night, we alternated who was on charge and long after.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else you want to say to all the new dads out there?
You're doing great. Becoming a dad, I've never done it, never will. Can't imagine how hard that is. But the fact that you're listening to this podcast at all means you're doing great.
Thanks. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, being so vulnerable, talking about your experience and being willing to tell the truth about me and our experience, and just really value having you in my life and being my partner and baby mama.
It's great to be
so
here.
grateful to have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Serenity. Everyone else, stay dedicated.